guys, how's it going? So this is a light switch pancake build that I've been putting together, and I actually ran these at Champs 2022. So with this pancake board, I wanted to put together a build video of why I like it so much for my builds and why I think it's the simplest, most straightforward build to get into FPV drone racing. So I want more people out Saturday morning this summer, and I hope this tutorial will be useful for some of you. So I'm going to go through this simplistic build from start to finish, Betaflight configuration, everything. So if 5-inch drone racing is something you're into, I highly recommend checking this out, and hope to see you out on the Saturday. So to dive right into the bottom of the build, you either use the light switch or the Switchback Pro. In this build I'll be using the light switch just because that's kind of what I'm switching all my frames over. I do recommend the light switch over the Switchback Pro for this build since we're already having a really compact stack in there. Propellers, your choice of MCKs from GemFan or the HQ R38s. The R38s would make this quad with a little bit of weight Freedom Spec legal if you're interested in that spec racing series. And for the motor, we'll be using the Headsup 2207 motor. Flight controller will be the Happy Model Pancake, and this flight controller will actually include your control link, ELRS SPI, and I'll be sticking to Betaflight 4.3 for this build. And then in addition to that, it also has OpenTX for your video. And I've actually been having pretty good luck with this board versus some of the cheaper Whoop boards that Happy Model puts out. So I do recommend this board. At least I've had good experiences. So, and then kind of the go-to everyone's using right now is the Foxeer 45 ESC. And when you're first starting out, I think for batteries, CNHL blacks, the 6S 1300s are the way to go. Once you start outpacing those batteries, you'll want to switch to tattoos. But I think those are fine starter batteries. For the camera, we're going to use the best analog racing camera, in my opinion, the Foxeer Predator V5. The Lumineer Axii Micro 2 is the antenna we'll want to be using for this build, just due to its really compact nature and weighs very little, and I've had great luck with it. And for the battery strap, I really recommend the Pyro strap, and I'll have links for everything of this below in the description. And then for the battery pad, I really like the Omegod sticky grip. So that's what I'm going to recommend. Throw the link to there. So it's been working great for me. And for 3D prints, I'll be using the Lumineer antenna mount, the Micro Mini. That's on the 533's printables page or Thingiverse page. I'm using the shark fin and also the clamshell 50-degree mount. So here you'll actually see some footage from Champs, and I smash into a bar during one of the dive gates. So you can see the steel bar right there that I slam into and actually hit the shark fin. So that's some major durability right there. To plan out the build and a little bit of the wiring, before we go into actually showing some of the soldering, I do just want to take a moment for awareness. The Foxeer ESC does match up pretty well with the board. All of these pins, when I put in my Acon V2 boards for the ESC, hooking them up to the Pancake flight controller. So as you can see, I have the stack. The bottom is the ESC and the top's the Pancake flight controller. And you can see I have it on top of the wiring diagram for the ESC. And then you can see on the Pancake all the pads. And that's also in the order of this connector here too. So this connector wraps up. And for the Acon ones, it was completely backwards, so I had to repin this whole connector. But for this board, you'll actually notice that the grounds match up, the battery input voltage matches up, motors 1, 2, 3, and 4. NC on the Pancake board just stands for not connected. We won't be using the ESC telemetry in here. We will be using bidirectional D-shot, but not telemetry. So what that means is you're going to need to be switching your current and telemetry ports. So these wires, you'll have to repin them, and I'll try and show that process in a minute. So you'll just want to flip these two pins. And for the camera, besides the motors, this will be the only soldering on the flight controller, which makes this build so awesome and quick to repair if you do break one of these boards. It's a super quick replacement. For the Foxeer, these two top pins we're not going to be using in this build. That's to hook up the little controller to change from PAL to NTSC or whatever you want your camera settings to be. I'll walk through that later. But basically the wiring is going to be, you're going to have video, to V in. That's just your camera in for the flight controller. You're going to wire the ground to ground on the flight controller. And VCC is just your 5-volt pin. And bam, we're done. Simple as that. So here we'll actually see the mid plate, and the bottom side, we're going to place the side of the screw into face down. So the protruding sides will go down. Then we're going to take this arm compression piece of carbon fiber. We're going to place it on top of that mid plate as so. And you're going to clip the arms in. So the arms have these little hooks. Sorry about the shadows, but the arms will click into the hooks right in your hair. So you'll kind of see how they just fit right in, Lego pieces, and you'll twist them in, and they'll actually make the shape of the little 3D printed. I custom printed some purple ones, but they come with your light switch kit, and you will just place them in those little dog bone. If they look dog bone, a little phallic, but you can place those in the light switch frame right there. And you put them in the insert, and what these do is as the arms, you tighten the arms down, they'll compress into that 3D print, and it'll actually grip it and make everything super tight in the build. And this is one of the most sturdy frames I have built to date. And it's a little bit tough to get it tightened, but once you get it tightened in there, it is super tight. So now you're going to take the screws and the chamfered holes for the bottom plate, and you're gonna loosely line it up. And what I like to do is to get 2 corners. So I'm gonna get the right corner, the top right, you'll see me slide it down in there, and then get it aligned to that bottom nut and start tightening down. I don't tighten it all the way, I just get it started and get it aligned to the hole and started. And then I'm gonna go diagonal and start tightening the bottom left hole. You'll see in a second. And as I'm tightening that, it'll be a little tight to get the screw down in there. So you have to force it a little bit, but you don't want to press down too hard, or else you'll pop out the press nut in that mid plate. So you don't want to force it too hard, but you want to get them aligned, just get them started, and then you tighten each a little bit at a time. So as you can see here, I'm just getting them started into that press nut in the back. And so you're going to tighten those down, and once you get all 4 of them started, you're seeing me just fast forward here, you're going to tighten them all the way down. You want to get these 4 screws really snug and in spot and tighten down. You won't crank them too hard, but you want them very firm in place. And then you're going to take the 2 flathead screws that are remaining. These are your compression screws, and those compression screws just go in those the middle press nuts on either side. And you do not want to tighten these down super tight. You want to screw it in, and you'll see me actually stop before I torque it. You're just going to tighten the screw to where you're barely putting any pressure on, and then go a quarter turn more, because you do not want to tighten this all the way down, or else you'll crack your bottom plate. And that's a mistake I did on my first frame. So after that, we're going to go on this build for the 20mm standoff, so the shorter of the 2. And these small little standoffs are perfect for this build. So you're just going to tighten these little standoffs on the 4 screws that came through there holding our arms down. And that'll set the framework for our frame. With that done, we're going to take the shorter, and these will be our stack screws. We're going to take these, put them up through the bottom plate. Great frame design that we can actually access the stack screws from the bottom of the frame. I love that. And after this, you're going to grab one of the plastic nylon nuts that comes in the kit, and you're just going to spend a bit of time tightening this all the way down. So this is my least favorite part of any quad build, is tighten the stack screws down. So put a 2mm driver in the back, and then just tighten it all the way down to the base. And I will fast forward this part, so I won't put you through the misery of watching me do this. So the next part, MG chemicals you can use for waterproofing or water resistance. So you just kind of paint it on the chips, and you don't want to get it in any connectors or anything. So I'm not going to have this be a tutorial of that. I'm just showing that's what I do. But on to the next step. We take the tall gummies, and you want to put the short side of the gummy on the bottom, because we're using nylon nuts on this build. So the risk of shorting is low to the frame. So we're just going to use the short side on the bottom of the Foxeer stack here, or the Foxeer ESC. So we'll just pull those through, and put it there. And I'm going to do a lot of fast forwarding in the video, so please just pause at any point if you need to see something again. So after we get all the gummies in, so now I'm going to mark the harness of the ESC to the connector, just to kind of orientate myself for when I plug it back in, and know that that's the ESC side when I unplug the harness to swap the wires. So we're going to be swapping on this one to match with the Pancake board. The ESC, the current telemetry port wires have to be swapped. So I'll try and get you a good camera angle here on that swap, but it is kind of difficult to get this on camera. So you can see you're going to have to take a really fine pair of tweezers, or maybe a sharpened paper clip or something of the sort. And you're going to have to be very gentle and bend back one of these prongs, because you don't want to pull this all the way back and crack it. You just want to pull it out enough so that the wire can slip out the bottom. And repinning these harnesses can be a bit of a pain. If you go with a Acon ESC instead of a Foxeer, be very careful, because you almost have to repin the bit of your harness. It's not too big of a deal. It's just a minor inconvenience. Once you've done it a few times, you get the hang of it. So bend the plastic back, pull the connector out, or the wire out, and you'll see the orientation. There's a little tooth, and make sure that tooth goes back in the same side. And so after we flip these wires, we're gonna press back down on the little plastic retainers that keeps them from sliding out. So just to kind of demo this. It was a little intimidating the first time I did this, but it's honestly not that bad. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. After you've done it a few times, it goes a lot smoother. Just be careful not to bend the plastic retainer teeth on the connector back too much, or they could crack off. So after you get them switched and inserted, you do want to press down back on those little teeth, so the wires don't just slip right back out. And then just get it plugged back into the ESC with Sharpie orientation, so you didn't lose which side's which. Now here I'm going to solder up the motor pads and the ESC pads. So I have a flux pen. This is not required. I do usually throw down some flux before I actually go into soldering. And this is the brand of rosin core solder I do. I highly recommend the lead tin solder, not the lead free ones. The lead free ones are very difficult to solder with, and this isn't necessarily a soldering tutorial, but it is targeted at beginners wanting to get into 5-inch racing. So I will include some of my soldering, and I'm by no means what I would call a good solderer, but proficient enough to get the builds done. So heating up the pads takes a little bit on the first side. Once the chip gets a little bit warmer, it gets a lot easier to solder these larger pads. The XT60 connector is, I believe, the hardest joint to solder. But now flipping the quad over, we'll go to installing the motors. Pretty straightforward. Just get your M2 screw that comes with the motors. We're only going to use 3 on this frame, and you'll just get one partially tightened down and aligned. And on these motors, sometimes the wire leads are bended a little bit out of place. Once you tighten the screws, it'll bend in place and be snug on the frame there. So I like to tighten one at a time, then not torque them too hard, but get them very snug in there. I apologize that I get the build a little bit out of order here. The XT60 and capacitor are soldered on, but we'll come back to those in a minute. So what I'm doing right now is I'm clipping the wires to length, and keep that wire for later. Extra race wire is always good to have handy in case you rip it off or cut a wire in a midair or something. But I'm clipping off the covering of the wires, exposing some wire, and then twisting the wires with my fingers so you don't have any flyers that could short on a different pad. And give yourself a little bit of slack, but you don't want an excessive amount either. So I go maybe like a centimeter above the pad with it constrained down, and don't make sure you have enough to tape them to the arm too. Slack to get the tape on the arm. And then always pre-tin your wires, just kind of soldering 101. Cleaning my solder tip there, pre-tin my soldering iron, and then heat the wire and just tin up the wire a little bit. I'll do that for each of these wires and make sure I don't have any flyers that could potentially short on other pads. And then just line up the wire. I like to angle them slightly back towards the motor I'm soldering, and getting my soldering iron clean there. Doing a little bit of pre-tinning to the iron. Having a clean tip is very important to getting good flow. And I am soldering around, I think, 390, 400 degrees for these. And I was struggling a little bit there, but it should be a very quick process of putting the iron down, seeing it flow, watching it re-solidify, and then picking the wire back up. Once again, this isn't a soldering tutorial, but I just wanted to include that since this is focused at a beginner build. Now we're gonna pin the wires as close as we can get to the body of the drone, and I'm just using electrical tape. I got some purple electrical tape there for the theme of T-Bell, but we're just gonna wrap it around, and you want to get it pretty snug and tight. And now we're gonna cut the XT60. So just line it up so you have enough to plug in the quad in the back. I find that about that distance is sufficient. Some people like longer leads for reaching freedom spec builds, but I prefer the shorter and saves weight. So cutting the insulators off the tips of the wires, and after we cut the tips of the insulators off, you want to roll them with your fingers because it's really important, especially on success in all these builds. You don't want any shorts in it. So you don't want any flyers and little stringers coming out of your leads. And then pre-tin the wires. I didn't actually show that tinning process here, but then you move into actually soldering them to the XT60 pads. And this does take quite a bit of heat, so I had to turn my soldering up higher, and this is the most difficult pad I feel for beginners, just getting it hot enough and getting the solder to flow without burning through the pad. But after you do it a couple times, you do get used to it. I'm not going to claim I have the cleanest looking XT60 solder pads by any means. So I reflow the solder a little bit on the pad, and then just have heat on the top of the wire with a pre-tinned tip on those. Just take a minute, watch the solder melt, and then reflow it. And then for the capacitor, ensure that the negative side of the capacitor is on the ground side. At Champs, I actually blew one up on myself at 3 a.m. soldering it backwards. Quad was fine. I just had to replace the cap, but scary. They do go they do have a big bang. So the negative stripe, you do want to make sure you place on the ground side. And what I actually do here is I have heat shrink that I put on my wires as well. This isn't required, but I do like doing it just to prevent an extra short from happening. So I cut a little piece of heat shrink off and put it on each of the wires and shrink it down, then just tin the tip of my capacitor wire. And then, yep, just tin the tip of the wires. And you do not have to reflow the whole solder pad. And once again, make sure the negative side with the giant negative marks is on the ground. And so I pre-tin my soldering iron up a little bit, hold the capacitor in place, and then just melt the tip of the wire into there. And you do not have to reflow the whole pad, but you do want to get enough reflow that you have enough strength and it's firmly making that electrical connection. But I reflow maybe the top quarter of the solder joint to get my capacitor down in there. And after the solder resolidifies, the light switch has this nice little slot for a zip tie to go in the back. So I just take that right around my capacitor in XT60, slide it through the grooves in the bottom, and then you don't want to crank it down, but you do want it firm. You want your ESC to tilt up if you tighten these down too much. But then we're going to put the gummies, and I recommend using the gummies that actually came with the Foxeer ESC, not the Pancake, because the Pancake has a little bit of a taller side to it. But since we use this tall gummies on the ESC stack, we can use the thinner gummies on this Pancake that came with the ESC. So currently here I'm using the Pancake ones, but I actually swapped it over to the Foxeer 45 with the extra shorter set of gummies that one came with. And once again, I did conformal coat this. You can kind of see the shiny on the Pancake on the bottom. I did not conformal coat the top, and make sure if you conformal coat, you don't get into any connectors or anything as well if you're looking to waterproof the quad a little bit. But I broke off the 30 by 30 corners, and so now we just have our compact little 20 by 20 stack. And I'm not going to tighten that down because we're going to solder that ground uh 5-volt, and then we're gonna tin up the video in pad as well right there. These are the three wires, the only three wires we'll be soldering on this for our camera. And for the camera wire, I clipped those to length. I kind of measured it out, pre-measured them out, and then you tin the tips of the wires. And you can see ground will go to that top pad, as we talked about previously in the video. And then 5 volts is going to go to that second pad. And then finally, a video in for your camera that goes into the flight controller is going to go there. And that's literally it. That's it. That's why I love this build. It's so easy. So now I take the camera wires and I do twist them up into a pigtail and then wrap them around the corner of that stand, the inside of that standoff screw or stab screw, and I wire them up out front. And then you take your nylon nuts that came with the light switch build and I tighten them down. And at this point, when I confirm, we'll go to the top of the Pancake ESC if you're looking to conformal with that. And once again, you don't want it in any boot buttons or connectors. And then we plug in the ESC connector and we'll insert the camera here. This is a little tricky. You have to make sure you have all the excess TPU trimmed off of the camera before you shove the camera in there. It'll fast forward me struggling to get the camera in. But after you do get it in, I like this mount just because you don't have any screws in the side of the camera. And I cut the wires pretty tight on this one, so I had a little bit of trouble getting the connector in. So I sped it up a little bit as I'm on the struggle bus here. But finally I get it in, and we'll just insert that super compact camera mount on this 20mm standoff build, which is actually awesome. And I'm just making sure I don't pinch any wires when I push the camera all the way down, so I'm getting them out of the way. And now I'm trimming off the 3D printed antenna mount. I'm just clipping the back of the Axii mount. Open it up so we can insert the Lumineer Micro V2 in there. And I'm using a left hand for this build, but I recommend others use right hand just because that's more common. The left hand I chose here just because I have a few other right hand quads, and at some competitions you need to have right and left hand. So I'm throwing a left hand polarized on this. And just kind of close in there. And you'll see I kind of twist it to get the pigtail in place when I'm inserting there. And we'll just put the ULF, give it a little press. And I have had lots of issues with these popping off in races. So I actually take B7000. That's B as in boy 7000 glue. And I put a giant glob of it over top of the connector. And it is removable if you kind of twist it off. You roll it off with tweezers. It is elastic, so you can remove it too. But I find this stuff really helps secure the connector in place. So I put a big glob of it there. And it's pretty rubbery when it solidifies too. So it is easy to remove, and that's what I like about it. So I'll just get it on the base, run it out on this tube, and I just got this for like $6 on Amazon if you're interested, but it is not required by any means. I just find it helps me quite a bit. And we're getting really close to being done. And now I'm actually going to be using the HD0 top plate, which is another $7, but the light switch top plate's fine too. I've just found that I crack those easier because of the chamfered screw holes, so I like the little bit beefier HD0 top plate. And so that's what I've been running on all my builds. And we're going to take the shark fin and then just align it up and insert the screws and tighten them down. And I really do believe in this top, not pod, but top fin. Is I have had that thing survive some gnarly crashes. I don't know how it's held up, but I've smacked some beams very hard. And finally, I actually lost my smoke checker. So I highly recommend, as a new person in the build, you get a smoke checker to plug into before you, in case, fry your quad if you wired something backwards or something shorting. But what I also do, if you have a multimeter laying around, you can measure the resistance. So I'm touching them right now. So there's continuity there. So this continuity check, we're going to have it on a beeper. And sorry, I didn't record the audio here, but you will hear a little beep as soon as you touch the positive and the negative in the XT60 because of the capacitor. But I like to probe around and just make sure there's no obvious blatant shorts in the build. And there's the final build. Now we're ready to move on to Betaflight. All right, so now that we have our light switch built, I want to get into the Betaflight side of things, and I'll just walk through page by page how I configure my Pancake quads. So with that, we'll get started. I'm going to be running Betaflight 4.3, but if you have ELRS 3.0 on your flash to your receiver module, some newer ELRS stuff, you need to be going to Betaflight 4.4, and a lot of the buttons will be similar, slight different changes. I am still on the older configurator because I haven't swapped a lot of my stuff over to 4.3 yet. I am switching my HG0 builds over, but for this build with SPI based ELRS, I don't see a reason to move to Betaflight 4.4 quite yet. So with that being said, I am sticking to Betaflight 4.3 for this tutorial. So with that, I'm just going to plug in my flight controller, and the first thing we always need to do whenever we're configuring a quad, I always go to presets tab right there, and then we're going to do save backup, and this is where I keep all my drone configurations. So I'm going to make a new folder called Pancake light switch, and then you have the date after there, and I'm just gonna say factory for the factory settings, and the quad will disconnect and it'll reconnect there. And then what I'm actually gonna do is, I had some issues, so I'm just gonna show you how to flash in case your flight controller came at 4.2 or something in the past. I think they should all be shipping it for Betaflight 4.3. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna update our firmware. So you should be able to detect auto detect, and your flight controller should pop in there. Just make sure that on the Happy Mile website that this does match your preferred or the flight controller list. It's very important that this does match, and you want full chip arrays selected. And I am actually going to go to 4.3.1 right now because 4.2 I had an issue. I'm not sure if it probably wasn't 4.2, is 4.3.2, but I'm going to 4.3.1 fixed it for me. So I'm going to flash 4.3.1 right now. Then you're going to click load firmware in the bottom right, and then you're just going to flash firmware and make sure you have good connection on USB. You do not want that coming unplugged while you're flashing your flight controller. So one last look. 4.1, I have the right target there for the Happy model, and we're gonna flash Betaflight 4.3.1. Now, flashing Betaflight 4.4 if you're on ELRS 3.0 is a different process, and there are videos out there. I know Bardwell, I think Lamone has a really good video on it too. So program is successful, so now we're gonna connect to it. We're going to make sure we apply custom defaults here. Absolutely always apply custom defaults. And we see 3 warnings here, and we'll work through those one by one in a minute. So first, on our startup page, you want your quad on a flat surface. You want it laying flat because we're going to calibrate the accelerometer here. So you just hit that, and you'll see it level out slightly to whatever surface you have on. And we're going to go to our ports. Most of the stuff's SPI based, so we actually don't need to do anything in here, which is pretty nice. Easiness of the build. And we're going to leave most of this the same. And actually, sorry, back to setup one more time. When you're setting up your quad, you do want to make sure your quad, if you turn the yaw, it's spinning in the right direction, and all your gyro directions and your flight controller is oriented the correct direction. So if you did mount it differently than I did in the video, you will have to play with the orientation of the board in the next configuration tab, and that'll just be changing here, and you just go through and play with if you want counterclockwise or what you want to do it there. So the next thing, I'm going to call my craft T-Bell, and this craft name will also be what's appearing under the craft name when I set up my OSD. So when people are racing, they can see that it's me in that. Leave this at 0. We don't use camera compensation racing, or I highly recommend against it. And we're going to change arm angle to 180 so you can arm at any degree. If your quad's in an awkward position in a gate, you still have the ability to arm and try and get out of it. Looking through here, we're going to leave all of this the same, air mode and OSD on. Beeper configuration, I'm going to leave all this as is. RX lost and RX set, it's not a bad idea to use those. If your quad's lost in the grass, you can turn off your radar or radio and it'll start beeping. So it's good to help find your quad. Sometimes it's annoying when you just do different things. So I'm going to leave it off for now. But then before you leave this page, you need to save and reboot. And a few more errors pop up. Configuration, power, maximum cell voltage. I'm going to bump that up a little bit because sometimes I charge up to 4.3 and I don't want it yelling at me when I do. So maximum charge cell voltage, going to save that. Failsafe, just drop and racing. We're going to come back to presets in a minute. And here, I'm going to recommend first flying the quad on just default Betaflight 4.3 and see what you think of that. But then I usually flash karate to my quads. So we'll get back to the presets in a minute. I just want to get the radio bound and everything set up. So, and we're also going to be using the ELRS preset for a lot of the set points for the link. I still use your preferred rates. That's a different topic. I still use Betaflight rates. I'm generic, and I've just found that these rates, which some of you may recognize is actually Vanover's rates, just have been working really well for me. So those point ones probably don't matter, but I've just been plugging them in, and it's been feeling really good to me. So I'm also actually scale, and I'm flying with a 90% throttle limit right now. I don't have the ability to go full stick at 6S, as I don't think a lot of people do. So at Champs, I was actually running an 85% throttle limit, and I felt like I still was not at the top of the quad's potential for sure. So 90 is definitely still more than I can handle, but I'm gonna leave it there because I fly better, and I've actually dropped quite a bit of time with that throttle limit in place. So now for actually binding the receiver, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our Express LRS page on the menu by hitting the sys key. And I apologize for the bad video quality here, but we're gonna go to Express LRS. We're gonna come down to bind and hit bind. Now I'm still on ELRS 2X, so and actually I already had my binding phrase and stuff set up with the receiver, but if you'll just hit bind receiver along with the bind button here, and then everything should pop in as normal. Is come down to the spectrum, this bottom one here, hit save, and then all my channels are remapped as normal. So I usually do that on aux 1. So after you get your receiver tab set up, next we're going to go to motors, and you want to make sure to be props out for racing. You want to be bouncing off things, not having your props grab onto gates as you fly into them. And so quad X, motor reversed, and we're going to need D-Shot 300. You can do 600, but you want to be doing 300 on an F4 board, is all the directions I've heard. So we are going to be using bidirectional D-Shot, and we'll upgrade our ESC to the latest in a minute. Bidirectional D-Shot, we have 14 motor poles on the heads-up motors, so that's correct. And we're going to save and reboot this now. After we save and reboot, we want to be plugging in our battery. So this is the first time we'll actually be plugging in our quad. So you hear the startup tones. And then what we're going to do is make sure our motor orders are in the correct orientation. So we're going to reorder our motors. We are going to accept the risks, and absolutely under no circumstances should you have props on at any point when you're configuring this stuff. So we're going to hit start. And we'll actually see that this motor is spinning, which is the back one. So the back right motor is spinning. So we're going to pick this. And then the second mode spin's the top right. So we're going to select that. Then we're going to select bottom left and then top right. And that is the most amazing functionality. Configuring before that, having to do all that junk and remapping via BL Suite was, this is just amazing. So yeah, it's really nice, this functionality now. So now we're going to make sure our motor directions are correct per this diagram up here. So I like to do it individually. You can have the wizard do it, but I'm going to do it individually. And then we'll just be putting on motor 1, I'm going to take my little piece of paper that I did before, and then you just press down on these little numbers, and you can see which direction it's kind of going, or you can just kind of feel it with your finger. Be very careful if you're using your finger. So we are in the correct direction for 1. For motor 2 up here now, for motor 2, press the button, and we are actually in the wrong direction. So we're going to hit reverse on motor 2. And now motor 2 is going props out. So motor 3, just as this one, is going inwards, which is correct. And now motor 4 is actually in the wrong direction, going props in. So then we want to reverse motor 4 too. And we'll just double check. 1 is going the correct counterclockwise, 2 is clockwise, 3 is clockwise, 4 is counterclockwise. And we're going to hit close that, and now our motor direction is set up. So with that being done, now we can move on to our modes tab. And before you move on to modes tab, there is something you want to do. You do want to unplug your quad. Typically, you don't want to leave it plugged in with that and just VTX burning up, and there's just no reason to have it plugged in for also safety. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go through, and we want to have ARM on aux 1. Then we're going to add a pit switch for racing. I think it's important to have a pit switch in racing. And then we want flip over after crash. So we're going to add range there. Just hit add range. And then I'm going to hide the unused aux channels that I'm not using. And what we're going to do here, and one that might be good is add a range. We're going to add a beeper. So aux 1, I'll trade out my quad for my radio here. So I'm just going to flip the switch so that I'm going to switch this to auto, and then I use this as my arm switch. So I'm just going to go like this, and I like it forward for armed. You can pick any switch you want, just ELRS. It does have to be aux 1. And I'll refer you to another channel for setting up models inside your radio. But it should be the same for each control link. So this is off, and then it'll be on for aux 1. And then I need to set up a beeper for aux 2. SC is bound for that. So down will be beeping. So I'll have that. And then I want to add auto for flip over after crash. I use this switch for turtle. So down position is turtle for me. We're going to do that. And then finally, we're going to hit pits for the VTX pit switch. I like to use these up here. The first few I used to use these for team racing, but now 1 will be there. 1 will be normal video, 6 will be in pit mode. So you can see auto there. And then as soon as I hit 1, it picks the aux channel. And then if I have it in 6, it'll activate VTX pit mode for me. And make sure I have the right model selected. Yeah, light switch ELRS. So with that configuration being done, actually I had that backwards. For that one I want it like that. So it'll be armed up there. And then we're going to go back to 1. And then that's how I like my channel set up. After we set up our modes, we set up our motors, and now I'm going to recommend we go into OSD. I highly recommend you keep your OSD very simple. And so what here we're going to do is to get a higher frame rate, we're going to pick NTSC, which does cause you to crop in, and then hit save because it does some funky things if you switch from PAL to NTSC, and we'll need to change the setting of the camera. I'll show that in a minute. We're going to come through low voltage. I recommend battery voltage. Here, I like my battery voltage in the upper right. This is all preference too, so might have this up here, and then we're going to do craft name. And then warnings, I do all my warnings, which is that low voltage there. And I also like to use the throttle limit. So, oops. I also like to use the throttle limit. So for the throttle limit, where are you at? There it is, throttle position. So I keep my throttle position in the upper left. And if you want to add a few more things like current draw, feel free, but I think less is more when it comes to OSD. When you're racing, you really just want the bare minimum information, and you just want to be focusing on flying. So with that, I'm just going to hit save. All right, so now going on to the VTX transmitter. What we're going to do is race band. I'm going to be using 2 in a little bit. Power 25, pit mode we're having on that switch, so it should just work through smart audio. And actually, I think I did miss this earlier. When we go to ports, we do need to come to peripherals and select VTX TBS Smart Audio under UART2. So it is important to have that enabled for your video to work correctly. Hit save and reboot. We're going to go back to the videos tab, and you should have the whole VTXtable loaded automatically. If this is missing, you can go to Happy Model's website and download the VTXtables for this flight controller, or reach out to their helpline. But the VTXtable is in there, is on their website. I did have to grab it a few minutes ago. But everything looks right here. Just gonna hit save. So what we're gonna do for our control link is for the PID tuning, for PID settings, for the feed forward rate, I'm running 250, so it says use between 45 to 50, so I'm just going to go up to 40 there, hit save. So the next one we're going to flash is we're going to go to presets, we're going to type in Karate Race Tune. So Karate Race 6S, and I'm on 4.3, so I selected the 4.3 one. There's also a one for 4.4 if you want to do that. So I'm going to use the official Karate, and we're on D-Shot 300. And if you have a noisy build, you can do that, but I feel like we have a pretty clean, solid light switch build, so I'm going to leave it there. We already did our control links through the ELRS presets, and so that I'm just going to leave it as that. Now, something very important. Very, very important is that you have ADC filtering off. You need to have this turned off. So I'll overlay a video of that as well. So to turn your ADC settings off, you need to go to the sys key, you go to the second tab to the right, hardware, and then you go down to the ADC filter, and you have to absolutely make sure it's unchecked. It is super critical this is unchecked, or else you could seriously damage the quad with these aggressive tunes. So we're gonna pick this one, and we are using D-Shot 300, so we're gonna agree to that. Hit save and reboot, because we are using a Betaflight 32 ESC. And I believe that should be everything for the configuration. So the last thing I'm going to do before we move on to the ESC, I'm going to save backup. And I'm going to say pre-flight setup. and I'm just going to call it that. So I have a backup if I want to flip back and forth to different ones. Another good suggestion is to actually do a backup as soon as you flash to the new version of Betaflight on your flight controller. I forgot to do that, but that is something I would suggest doing as well. So with that, we'll move on to the ESC configuration. So Betaflight Suite 32 is the software used to configure your ESC settings through the flight controller pass-through. So what you'll need to do is get the latest Betaflight Suite 32 from Git. So you can just download the latest and whichever one you need, Linux, Mac, or Windows, and you download that and run the installer. I already have it installed, so I'm just gonna run it right here and just double click. And it's absolutely essential you have no props on. I don't leave my motor nuts on sometimes in case it flies off, because weird things can happen. Your motors can spin up because you have an energized quad at this point. So what we'll do now is you'll plug in your quad. So you need a battery plugged into your quad, and then you plug your USB cable into the flight controller. And then you click read setup. And so it should read the Foxeer 45 setup. And hopefully we don't get any errors. And we'll see we have 0 bad for each of those. So it's good. It saw everything there. Foxeer Reaper 45. It's on 32.9. So we're going to call that good. I'm not going to update the firmware on this since it's already on 32.9. But there are a few settings that we should change. Now, you will notice that Betaflight already got the motors reversed. We used to have to come in here and reverse motors in order, but we don't have to do that anymore. For racing, I'm not going to claim to know why, but it seems to be the magic sauce is to go to 23 for the motor timing for all your motors. And then locked PDM frequency of 48 hertz. And it looks like the Foxeers do come pre-configured that way. I know the Acons didn't. They were the variable PWM. But I've just been flying fixed 48, and it's been flying great for me. So I'm going to stick to that. And everything else, I'm just going to leave as normal. I think it should be good. So I'm going to write setup to all my ESCs now. You can see it going through the progress, so it wrote all the ESCs okay. And we're going to go on to ESC overview and 23 degrees motor timing and 48 hertz across with the Betaflight already reversing the motor direction. So with that, we're just going to disconnect. And your quad will reboot on disconnecting. Exit BL Heli. And now our quad should be in a functional state. So I apologize ahead of time. This isn't the best video setup for doing this, but I do have a little monitor right now for my analog video. So now we have to flip our camera actually upside down. The 533 ones actually come pre-flipped, but we're going to use a little controller that came with the camera to change a few settings. So this is this little cable coming out of there. You'll just plug it right in before or after you boot. I think either one's fine. And then what we're going to do is I think video actually powers off USB, so we might not even have to plug in a battery for the Pancake board, which is important to know because if you're in the pits, you'll screw people up just by plugging your flight controller in. Don't be that person. So right now, sorry, my camera is inverted, but the camera is upside down. So you can see that the camera is showing everything upside down right now. So what I do need to do is to flip it. And what we're going to do to flip that, I apologize for this jank setup, but we're going to hold the top key on the joystick, the pad, and then you'll be able to go down to PAL, and we're going to switch this to NTSC. And now it's going to freak out. And so now what we need to do is power cycle. So we're gonna unplug it, kill power, plug it back in, and see if it kept. Hopefully it did, and it did. It kept NTSC even if you didn't save. So we're gonna keep it NTSC, and now we need to get that Foxeer logo gone from this controller. So now we're gonna hold the center button down, or sorry, it's actually just press the center button. It's not hold it down. I do this like once a build and then forget for it forever. So we're gonna set camera ID to off. Picture quality adjust. If you do want to go in there and change settings, you definitely can. Day night auto, language English, camera reset. Just leave that and then hit exit and save all. And now we should be, oh, we need to do one more thing. We need to adjust the picture quality and do HV flip. So HV flip will get us moving forward and up. So we're coming forward, and we need to make sure we can turn left and right and we have correct view. So I guess I can try and get the quad in the background, but as we move forward and left and right. And I apologize for this jank setup, but that is how you get it. And then we'll come down to return. Just click the button. Exit. And you do need to hit save all. So with all of that done, we should have a quad that's ready to go up in the air. So this is the Maiden test flight, and I just want to say thanks for riding along with me, and hopefully I got the quad in air for you and you're ready to come out and race Saturday. So super appreciate it.